Boker Tov, today's daf is daf Yud Beis in Gitin, as we learned for 4 Shleima 4, Elazar ben Reuma and Yosef Israel ben Chaim Michal. We'll start from the 2 dots, about 8 lines down on daf Yud Beis, but let's quickly look at the Mishnah on Yud Aleph and Yud Beis in case we may have forgotten it overnight. Homer 10 gets at least if a man says to somebody, sends a shliach and he says, give this get to my wife, or Shtashech Zela Abdi, we're talking of course about an Eved Kanani, and he wants to free him, or divorce his wife, divorce the Eved Kanani. And Rav Meir says you can go back on either one because it's a chov, it's an obligation, it's not an advantage it's a disadvantage, let's call that, for the woman to be divorced or for the slave to get his freedom because here he has food, etc. He's taken care of by the master. So Rav Meir says in either case is considered a disadvantage for the recipient, the woman or the Eved, and therefore, if it hasn't been given yet, once it's given to them, then of course they're divorced or freed, as the case may be. But Rav Meir says in either case, if it hasn't been given yet, he can retract. Go in front of a best retract. In other words, he dismisses the shliach as his shliach, and it's no longer valid. Even if the shliach gives it to the recipient, it's not valid because he's he fired him and he's no longer dismissed him as his agent. Chacham say no. We get the nation. That's true by get the nation because it's a disadvantage presumably for a woman to be divorced. But not when it comes to freeing a slave, because the messenger has effectively gained it on behalf of the Eved. The Eved wants to get his freedom, presumably according to the Chachamim. He wants to get his freedom, and therefore you can't. Once the shliach has received it from the master, there's a machlokas among the Rishonim. Is he mazaket for it immediately or only when it gets into the hands of the Eved? But be that as it may, assuming now that let's say he's mazaket for it right away, as Tosi said before. Another Rishonim say now. Rashi seems to go both ways. But Lefisha Zachan Shalom Fanav, in other words, he acquires it for him. So therefore, you can't go back on the. If once a man gives a shtar shifra to a shliach to give it to his Eved, even if he retracts, the shliach was mazaka, gained it for him because it's only an advantage for the shliach to gain his freedom. You can't make an obligation for a person only in front of him if he agrees to it. So in other words, in a woman, we assume it's a chov, so therefore you can go back on that deal. The shliach cannot acquire the divorce for the woman because presumably she'd prefer not to be divorced. But the Eved, we assume he'd prefer to be freed. Why did he say why is it an advantage for an Eved to be free? After all, isn't he getting food from his master? So here we get to the issue of the day. A man can decide not to feed his slave. He can say, work for me and don't slave. That's what we're assuming right now. He's allowed to. But he can't decide not to feed his wife. That's part of his obligation at the time they got married, part of the ksuba that he agreed to feed her. Even if he doesn't find pleasure in his eyes, unless he divorces her, he is obligated to free him. But the Eved, he could say, I don't want to free him. Amar lahem. So Rav Meir says, what are you talking about? It's a disadvantage because while he is an Eved, if the master's a Kohen, he can eat truma, and now he can't, right? Just like it's a disadvantage. The wife, if she's divorced from a Kohen, cannot eat truma the same way. The Eved can't, so it's a disadvantage for him to be freed, and therefore the shliach cannot be mazaket from him. They said to him, Neshu Kinyano. That's because he is his acquisition. Now, what does that mean? How does that answer the point? He said, well, that's only, he said to the Rav Meir, that's only because it's acquisition. See, because he could easily get rid of the acquisition, so it's not an advantage for him. He can easily get rid of him, and therefore it's not an advantage. And then you say, well, it's an advantage because he'd rather stay. Yeah, but he can take that advantage away too by selling him off, as we'll see. So we have this machlokas between Chacham and Rav Meir. Can you retract a job that you gave to a messenger to give a shtar shifra to your Eved? Rav Meir says as long as the Eved hasn't received it. Once he's received it, he's got his freedom. It's too late. But if he hasn't received it yet, Rav Meir says you can retract because it's a disadvantage. From the Chacham say no. It's an advantage for him. He gets his freedom. What's the advantage of him staying as a slave? Because he gets food there. The master doesn't have to give him food anyway. So this is where we are on the Gemara now in Daf Yud Beis at the 8th line. If he wants to, he doesn't have to feed a slave anyway. What's the advantage for him staying as a slave? He gets food. The master could tell him to work without giving him food. We see here that a master could tell his Eved Knani, work for me and I'm not going to feed you. So how is he going to maintain his life? Go beg. Well, all your work belongs to me. I'm not going to feed you. And if you want to eat, go beg. Don't, on your time, not on my time. So this is a machlokas whether you say that or not. You could work for me and I can feed you. So we see that from our Mishnah. Because the Chum said, if he wants to, he doesn't have to feed him. No, here it's speaking about this, where he says, if you want to eat food, so go the first, let's say the first hour of the day, you earn enough food, go work for your food. In other words, don't say you work for me. I'm going to say whatever you, let's say for the first hour, first 2 hours of the day, that's your food. So that's what he told him. So if you say, Chachamim said, why is it not an advantage for the slave to be freed? Because the master doesn't want you have to feed him anyway. What do you mean? Does that mean he could tell him to work without feeding? No, he could tell him that the first couple hours of the day, he could tell him, I might say, go work for your food, right? That's what you could do. Not that you have to beg, but the first couple hours of the day, that will be for your food. Okay, you could tell him that. So can it do that by a woman too? If that's the case, so what's the advantage for a woman to stay married? He could tell her that too. If a man could tell his wife, listen, you want to eat, go work for it. I don't have to feed you. There's Isha Milo. So Isha Milo. So why can't you say the same argument by a woman? And say by a woman, maybe it's an advantage for her to be free. What's the advantage? That she gets food? Maybe the husband can tell her, go work for your food. It says Isha below Safka. A woman normally cannot earn enough to pay for her mazonos. And therefore, she has to add on. So therefore, by a woman, it is an advantage for her to stay married because the husband's going to support her. She can't support herself. That's what we would say today. She can't support herself. So you could say, maybe Evan also can't support himself. In other words, if you want to say that you can't prove from over here that a man can tell his slave, go beg. You work for me and go beg for your food. But rather, it's speaking about where he said, you're going to work for me and the first couple hours a day you can work for yourself to get your food. But I'm allowing you that. Meaning, so maybe the Evan also doesn't have enough food, that cannot support himself, and he have to work, and the master would have to support him. Eved denam kar say lo shavi, an Eved who the bread of his belly is not worth. In other words, if an Eved cannot work, cannot earn enough to feed himself, what do they need him for? If an Eved cannot support himself, he can't do enough work that would provide food for his own belly. So what's in if they have to say you're going to work the whole day and then we'll add on to support you. So what do they need him for? So an Eved presumably he can earn enough money both to feed himself and to do a little extra work for the owner. So we can't prove from over here. Again, this is the issue of the day. Can a master tell his Eved, work for me and I'm not going to support you? You have to work for me. Where are you getting your food? Go beg. At night, you can go beg for your food. Can he do that or not? From our Mishnah, we want to prove that he can. No, maybe it's speaking about where he said, listen, you work a little bit for your food and the rest of the day you work for me. So let's try to bring a proof to this question. Can he tell his Eved, work for me and I'm not going to feed you? Toshma, Eved shagololor neged. Eved who killed somebody b'shogeg. What's the deal? An Eved is like a half Jew. It's like he has the mitzvah of a woman. And if you kill somebody b'shogeg, he has to go to the city, to the refuge cities. Shagololor miklat. In that case, he's not working for his master now because he's in the air miklat. Ein rabba chayv tzon. He doesn't have to feed him. If he works in that city, the product of his work product goes to his master. So here it's a proof also. It says the master doesn't have to support him, and whatever he earns go to his master. So again, you could say it's a proof from here that the master could tell his Eved, work for me and I'm not going to feed you. Again, here he told him, listen, he didn't say go beg. He says, okay, let's say, I'll give you an example. The first 2 hours of the day, you're going to work for your food, and the rest of the day, you'll work for me. If he's working, why, again, if his work product is to feed him, why does the master get, he said, this master gets the benefit of his work product? The extra part. It was over and above what he eats. Let's say, like an example that I gave, he gives, for 2 hours a day he works, that's enough to feed himself. The rest of the time, what he works over and above that, that's for the, that goes to the master. Let's say first 2 hours a day he works, that gives him enough money to feed himself 3 meals a day. The rest of the time, that goes to the anything that he earns over and above his own necessary food sustenance certainly should go to the master. You might say that what? Since if the servant cannot, if the slave cannot to support himself, the master doesn't have to support him. You might think since the slave, he doesn't have enough to eat, that lo yovle, the master doesn't have to support him. If he has extra, maybe the master shouldn't take from him. In other words, if the guy's in an Ari Miklat now, and the master doesn't have to support him, and if he can't feed himself, it's his tough luck, he's got to go begging. So if he has extra, I might think also the master shouldn't take it. The master gets it. As the master has both advantages. He doesn't have to feed him, but he could tell him, but it doesn't mean that he could tell him, go beg. It means he could say, listen, if you're going to work, you'll support yourself, and the extra part will come to me. So why are you talking about Ari Miklat? It's in any case, it's like that. We're saying now that a master can always tell a slave, I'm not going to feed you directly. You work for 2 hours, that'll feed yourself, and the rest you come to me. So why are you talking about Ari Miklat? I might think. By Ari Miklat it says, right? He will go to one of those things, give him a little extra. In other words, make sure that he can live there. We don't say that. In other words, when an Eved goes into Ir Miklat because he killed somebody b'shogeg, he still has an obligation that Ma'aseh Yadav goes to his work product goes to his master, and his master doesn't have to support him. But it doesn't mean that the master could say, go beg. If he's able to work, maybe the master could say, okay, you work for a couple hours to feed yourself, and the rest comes to me. It's no proof that he could say, I want all your work product, and you have to go beg. Can't prove it from there. I have a Medictani Seifa. There it says in the Seifa by the Yermik, Isha should go. So let's say a woman, the same thing applies. If she killed the shogeg, Isha should go. So let's say he has to feed her. It's mashma that he didn't say go work for yourself. The Amarla, if her husband said to her, first go work and whatever you can earn, that's your food. Why would he have to pay? Since in the Seifa he didn't tell anything, Reisha Nami the law, it's mashma also in the Reisha, he didn't say go work for you, but rather he doesn't have to support him. No, Lolam the Amarle. He did say the Isha, but Osafka, as we said before, a woman can't support herself. He could tell her. See, I mean, a man could tell his wife, listen, I want you to go work. If you're able to work, go work, and whatever you could feed yourself, you'll feed yourself, and I'll be mashlim, I'll fill up the rest, I'll do the rest for you. So the Isha lo Safkala. Then that's why he says Isha should go so make it because she can't support herself. She might be able to support a little bit, but not all the way. But Midik Tani Seif of the Imam law, if he told her, see my death Rashoy, he could tell her go work and feed yourself and then Machal the Reish of the law. It's mashma the Reish, he didn't say it. No, it's Hachikamer. If she can support herself all the way, if she's able to support herself, he can say, listen, you're able to support yourself, you have a good trade, I don't have to feed you, support yourself. I'm a to feed you if you can't feed yourself. But if you can feed yourself, he's allowed to. So the Gemara says, if she could support herself, what's the chiddush there? Why is there chiddush to say that if a woman could support herself, her husband has the right to tell her, go support yourself? And I'm not going to give you mouth saying all Jews, all Jewish women are daughters of kings. We're all malachim. So you might say the pasuk says the pasuk says it's called kvuda bas melech pnima. A woman's covet, a woman's honor is to be indoors, not to go out and work. Rashi says pnima snua, modest, not to go around bisham. In a city like Ir Miklat, that's not her hometown. Maybe in her hometown she's known, she knows the way around. But in a place where she's not known, she's not from that town, so they don't recognize her. But Elim came, she's got to go out and do some sales, visit a visiting salesman, if she's in her hometown, so people bring her work to the house, right? She's sewing or doing computer work or whatever. But there, she's got to go out and market herself. Maybe that's not proper. Kamash blood, he could still do that. So we have this question. We haven't been able to prove yet whether a master could tell a slave, work for me, and I'm not going to feed you. Go beg for your food. In the years of famine, an Eved could tell his master, listen, either feed me, either feed me, support me. Oh, it's let me go free. The master could do whatever he wants. If there's no food, he doesn't have to support him. Maybe that's machlokes. Chum say he could tell his Eved, too bad, go beg. He doesn't have to free him. The Chum say he could tell him, listen, too bad, you have to work for me, and I want food, go beg for it. Legal says, no, you can't do that. He could tell us in a year of famine, he could say either support me or let me go free. The Tisba says, you think it's that simple? Hi, O Parnasaini. What does it mean, O Parnasaini? Oh, it's what is that language? Either support me or let me go free. O Parnasaini, what does it mean? Why should he go free? He could say either support me or let me support myself. My work product should be for my support. That should be the argument. What's this business about? Or let me go free. What difference if you have this machlokas, whether a master could tell his slave, work for me and go beg for your food? What difference does it make if it's a year of famine or not? Here is speaking about where he told him go work for yourself. In a year of famine, he can't even support himself. It's so bad that the food is so expensive that even the slave can't support himself. Either support me, or because it's a shnei b'tzoros and I can't feed myself, let me go out free. So people will see. Once I go out free, I'm a full Jew, and people have rachmanas on me. People will give me money when they, come around in shul. They'll support me. People will see I'm poor. For abundance time, people say people who would support a free man, like a free Jew, would support an Eved Kanani also, because an Eved Kanani is a half a Jew. As I say, Vagrash says the Shach mitzvahs keisha. He has mitzvahs like a woman. Mitzvahs seishes, he's chayv in all mitzvahs lo say, and mitzvahs seishalo as man grama. So the argument is not whether you can tell your Eved, work for me and I'm not going to pay you at all, but I'm not going to support you at all, but rather if you told him work for me and you could work for yourself and for your food, but he can't support himself, what's the argument? If Shmuel says, well, if he can't support himself and you're not going to support me, let me go out free. People will have rachmanas on me, they'll feed me. And Rabbanan say it doesn't make any difference if he's free or not. They'll support him anyway if he's hungry. Tashma. So we're trying to bring proofs to this question. Can a master tell a slave, work for me and I'm not going to support you? Tashma. Damrab. A person sanctifies the work, the hands of his slave, meaning anything that he produces belongs to Hekdesh. Anything he produces belongs to Hekdesh. In other words, he can't enjoy the work of anything. Neither the master nor the slave can enjoy the product of his work because it belongs to Hekdesh. What can the Eved do now? So it says there, also Eved Lava can borrow money, ba'ochel, and eat food with that money. So it's not his work product, the food money that he borrowed. But also Perea, and he works, as we'll see, little by little and pays it back. Now the obvious question is, if his work product belongs to Hegdish, when he works, how's he going to pay it back? Okay, well that question more will deal with that. But let's assume right now that his work product goes to Hegdish. He has to borrow money in order to eat. He borrows money, eats, and then he works, as we'll see, little by little and pays it back. What happened over here? What is the master effectively doing? He's saying, you know what? Your work product belongs to Hegdish. Right? It doesn't belong to me, it's like you. And what does that ever have to do? He's got to go beg, borrow, and steal, right? He's got to go beg for food, borrow money, pay it back, whatever. He's got to go borrow. He can't. So you can tell that's effectively the master's telling him, work for me. I'm giving it to Hegdish. I'm giving everything, donating all the work to Hegdish, and I'm not going to feed you. So the Charetz approves. Asking us, no. My skin models, maybe he's giving him food. Maybe he's makdish your work product, but I'm giving you food. My love of ochel. So that why does he have to borrow money? If he's feeding it, if the master's feeding him, why does he have to borrow money to feed himself? Oh, la'adafa. He's very hungry now, right? The master gives him a basic meal. He gives him the standard tray with a little bit of peas and a little bit of this and a little bit of that. He needs to eat a little bit more, So he's giving him extra. He needs to borrow for the extra. Okay. So v'lei malei hegdish here. This is a strange lashon. Why does hegdish say until now when you work for your master, you got your standard tray? But now it should also be enough for you without the extra. Why do you have to get extra for? So the Gemara says hegdish gufa nechalei. Hegdish gufa is happy. They want the eved. They're getting hegdish is getting all the work product, everything that he produces, right? So hegdish would rather, if you have a slave, you think about it, is it good sense to starve him or give him the minimum fee? You want him to be full so that he can work hard and earn more for you. So hegdish is that they want the eved to be stronger. Okay, so that's what happens when he gave the man. That's no proof at all to our question because the master gave him food. What does he have to borrow for? Is to borrow for extra food. But that question is. Yeah, so the hegdish everybody wants him to work harder, right? The owner wants to give a bigger, and hegdish also wants him to work harder because hegdish is getting the benefit of his work profit. Hegdish is not feeding him. So that's the question. Hegdish isn't feeding him. So what's this business about v'lei malei hegdish? The Mefarshim deal with that. It's a complicated question. It's a very difficult question. Why is hegdish getting involved over here? Hegdish is just the recipient of his work product. What are they telling him for? The answers we'll see is because. Let's see the next piece. The next piece says, what is his business? If his work product belongs to hegdish and he borrowed money, how does he pay it back? Whatever he produces belongs to hegdish. Also, pareya, he works and he pays back. Whatever he earns belongs to hegdish. So how could he pay it back? He's borrowing money from Yankel, the money lender, right? And he's paying it back. How can he pay it back? Whatever he earns belongs to hegdish. It doesn't belong to him. Interesting thing. Hegdish is not chal unless there's a sheva pruta. Rashi says the lo chayil hegdish apachas m'sheva pruta. In other words, what he does is he works for a half a pruta, right? He works for a half a pruta, and he gives the half a pruta back to the money lender. Okay, then he works for another half pruta. He gives money as long as it's less than a pruta. Hegdish doesn't acquire it. That's how it works. So also prayer belongs to hegdish. No, pachas m'sheva pruta. Okay, so therefore, now go back to the first question. What is hegdish involved over here in telling him what he's eating for? Because hegdish is still losing. See, hegdish, what happened over here? The master was saying is giving him food, but it's not enough. So he wants to borrow and eat more. And hegdish is happy with that because he's going to be hungry. But why? What's the lashon of? Why isn't hegdish say, what do you need this extra food for? You had enough till now. Hegdish isn't feeding him, and hegdish isn't obligated to feed him. But hegdish is losing by him borrowing money and having to pay it back, because even though they're not entitled to the money until it reaches a pruta, so therefore technically he can work for a half a pruta or 9/10 of a pruta or 99% of a pruta and pay it back without giving it to hegdish. But at the end of the day, hegdish is losing somewhat by it too. The Mefarshim deal with this question. What is that lashon of v'lei malei hegdish? That's how you have to understand, because hegdish is still losing out at the end of the day by him eating. And the answer is no, they're not losing out because hegdish is happy for him to be well fed. Hachanam mistavra. Now, let's understand. So what is our answer here? We tried to say, is this a proof that owner could tell the slave, work for me and I'm not going to pay you. Go beg, borrow, and steal, right? Go fend for yourself to get food. She says, no, it's speaking about where he gave him food. He gave him the basic food. The reason he had to borrow was to get extra food. Hachanam Misavetz Mustafa that way, that we're speaking about over here where he gave him food, and he's not allowed to say, work for me and beg for your food. Rav said, this is Rav was one who said this. We started with Toshma freelance from the bottom of Rav Toshma Dam Rav. Rav said this, and here Rav continued on. It started with the Omer Rav Makdishi De Avdo. If you're Makdish, again, the work product of your slave, also Eved Osav Ochel, that Eved can continue to eat. Also Eved Osei, and as he can work for himself and eat. Now how can he eat? The Elo, if he's not going to work Mom Palplay, who's going to feed him? And as if he's not going to feed him. Now what does that mean? I mean, at Bishlam Hachmamala. In the first case, where he's giving him food, the master's giving him food, and he can't say, I'm not going to feed you, you have to feed yourself, work for me and go beg for food. And in this case, he didn't give him food. In the second case, where Rav says, if you work for your Eved, the Eved could still, even though you're Makdish, the Eved is entitled to work and get his food. So why? Why? Because in the second case, he's not giving him food. If the master's not giving him, the master's obligated to give him food. So like if something is obligated, if I'm obligated to give this money to Yanko, I can't give it to somebody else. So again, if he's obligated to give him food, he can't be makdish Yedei Avda if he's not giving him food, because the first obligation is to let him work for his food. So makes sense. The Amabishlam of the first case is he's giving him food. Because why? Because he can't say work for me and go beg. And the second case is where he's not giving food. Shapir. It makes sense, right? Shapir. Hegdish is not chal on the case where he's not giving him food, because first he's got to get his food. So his first obligation, the first portion of his work product is to support himself. That makes sense. But if you're telling me that in the first case he didn't give him food, and he could say, work for me and go beg, so who's going to feed him? How can you say that he's not entitled to? So the law of the man palachle, man the boy, and my the boy, man the boy. Let him whoever he wants. Let him serve whoever he wants. In other words, it's if you say that he's not giving him food in the first case, and he could say go work, and he could say work for me and go beg. So what do you mean the ilo of the man palachle? What's that lashon of the ilo in the second case where Rav says makdish the avda also have it also v'achol the ilo of the man palachle, because if he's not going to work, who's going to feed him? Man the boy niflche. In other words, what do we care? Whoever wants to. In other words, let him go out free. What's he supposed to do? Man pach bet mia, man the boy niflche. But Rashi says the law of the man palachle, man pach, who's going to feed him? Man the boy niflche. Whoever wants to feed him, he has no way of getting food. So what do you mean? He has to be able to work to get his food. If you hold that you're allowed to tell him, work for me and I'm not going to feed you, that was the first case where if you say that the first case is where he's not giving him zonos, and he can say, work for me and go beg. So what's that lashon? And Rav continued in the second case to say, well, he can go work the law of the man polchai. Who's going to feed him? Man the boy neflechei. Whoever wants to feed him. In other words, he has no way to get food. Whoever's going to give him food. He has no way to work. You said he's allowed to work because otherwise, who's going to feed him? What do you mean? If he's not entitled to get paid. He's allowed to be told to work without getting paid. So you say, what's that lashon of? Well, because if he's not going to work for himself, who's going to feed him? What do you mean who's going to feed him? It's nobody's job to feed him. Let him go. Let whoever wants to feed him can feed him. He's a stucker case. Nothing you could do. So what is that lashon of? He's allowed to work for himself, because if so, who's going to feed him? I'll tell you who's going to feed him. He's got to go to the charity and get food there. So you see, obviously, in the first case, it's speaking about where the master cannot say, work for me and go beg, because otherwise, if that would be the case, what's that lashon? What did Rav say in the second case? He can go out and work. Why do you have to go out and work? He's not entitled to go work. Why? Because who's going to feed him otherwise? The answer is nobody's going to feed him. He's got to go beg. So since that the Gemara, Rav didn't say that, it's obvious that Rav holds that you cannot tell your slave, work for me and I'm not going to feed you, go beg. Tashma, now we're going to prove the other way around. This is going to be a proof that with a Rav is a Rav Tanu Polik, but another Amora can argue on Rav. There's another one who argues on Rav. Tashma, don't Rabbi Yochanan. Let's say you cut your neighbor's Eved's hand off. There's an Eved belonging to your neighbor, to your colleague, whatever, and you cut his hand off by mistake. No, since shifter for Rabbi, you have to pay the lack of work. Shifter means lack of a paycheck. He can't work during that time until he gets a refuah, and his doctor bills. You have to pay for the master. Also, Eved nizun menat staka. That Eved is fed from the staka. Nizun gets from staka. He's asking him now. The master is getting paid for his loss of work. The master is getting paid to feed him, to heal him until he can get back and do some work. He might not be able to do the same work. He's also got to pay for the nezek. For example, let's say hand, maybe now he can be a guard. He can do something else. Okay, so he has to pay for that too. But what about his food? He can get from the tzedakah. Even though the master is getting the benefit of his work, he's effectively got to pay for his lost work. He's getting paid for his lost work from the person who did the damage. Shift over Asal Rabo. Also, he has to get from the sucker. He doesn't have to feed him. You see here, that the master can tell the slave, I say me, you work for me, I'm not going to feed you. You got to get paid from the charity. right? So the Gemara says, oh, maybe he's giving him food. The master is giving. How do you know? Maybe in this case, the master is giving food. So why is he getting food from the tzedakah? You can't get food from the tzedakah box if he's getting food from the master. Gemara says, that's for the extra food again. If he's get the lashon should be, and he gets support from the tzedakah, not food, but nizun is mashma basic food. It's the basic food he's giving tzedakah. You see over here from this sheet from Rav Yochanan. So we have machlokas between Rav and Rav Yochanan. Rav holds that a master cannot tell his slave, work for me and go beg for food. Rav Yochanan says he can tell his slave, work for me and I'm not going to feed you, go to the charity, go beg for your food. Amar Mar. So you just said no shifta refuah so l'rabo. If you cut off your friend's slave's hand, you got to pay for his loss of work and refuah. Shift of pshita. Obviously, the loss of work, of course, belongs to the master. The slave works for the master. Slave's not losing money himself. It's not his paycheck. It goes to his master. Isn't that obvious? Before us, pay the refuah, pay for the refuah. Before us, the day. What do you mean? The refuah has to go to pay for the doctor. Of course, that belongs to the slave. In other words, not that it belongs to the slave, but means the refuah means the doctor bills, the medicine, etc. That he has to pay for. The boy Yitzuya, but he has to get healed with that. So let's read it. They said, well, we'll give you medicine and you'll be healed in 5 days. They gave him a very strong, painful medicine and he was healed in less time, let's say 3 days. Now the same at Tsar today. I might think that Tsar, meaning he had to go through a more painful recovery with the medicine, and that Tsar maybe belongs to the slave himself. No, that also goes to the master. The master owns him totally. Tanya, Amr Abelezer. Now we're going to go back now. So we've decided here there's a machlokas on Maram or Rav. It's actually a Tana, Rav and Rav Yochanan argue about whether you could tell your slave, work for me and I'm not going to feed you. Go beg for your food at night when you're not working. That's what he could. That's the machlokas. Rav says you cannot do that. Rav Yochanan says you may. Going back to the machlokas in the Mishnah though that we started with today. Is it an advantage for the slave to be freed or not? Chacham say it's an advantage, and therefore you cannot retract once you send a messenger to free your slave. And Rav Meir says it's a disadvantage for the slave because it's a disadvantage. You cannot retract, and you cannot retract. Number 10 gets a leash, shows up lofty. You may retract because it's a disadvantage for him to be free. The Chacham say you may not retract in the case of the Eved because it's an advantage for him to be free. So we have this machlokas. So we have, what's the dialogue? Tanya Rav Lezer. Amarno Rav Meir. Bryce says Rav Lezer quoted a dialogue like this. Rav Meir says, it's an advantage for him, like the Chacham said in the Mishnah. It's an advantage for him. So you want to retract, but the messenger already took possession of the shtar shechur, of the freedom document. He took possession from it on behalf of the recipient, on behalf of the slave. As we said, it's a machlokus whether he was mazaket for him right away or only when the Eved actually receives it, but he's mazaket for him. So Amar Meir Balos Chuslev Shiasim Tafsir Cheres. Amar Lanu, so he told us, no, it's a disadvantage for him to be free. Shemhaya Eved Kohen, if he was the Eved of a Kohen, can't eat Truma. So it's a disadvantage. He'd rather be a slave. Therefore, you can retract. It's a disadvantage. Aman lo, if he wants to, he doesn't have to feed him. If he wants to, he could tell him, as we said now, that it could be that he could tell him, go work the first 2 hours of the day for yourself. I'm not going to feed you. The first couple hours of the day, you'll get fed on yourself. So they told him, he's allowed to. So it's not an advantage for him to be working for the guy because the guy doesn't have to feed him anyway. The guy could tell him, go work for yourself. Amarlani told him, Ma ilu Eved Kohen Shabarach, Eishes Kohen Shamarda. What about an Eved who ran away? An Eved Kohen who ran away, or a wife of a Kohen who rebelled against her husband and ran away. Shamarda Bala. They could still eat Shuma, but that ain't ochel, right? And this one can't eat. In other words, there's a disadvantage. What Meir answered is, what Meir said, it's an advantage for him to stay as an Eved, because if he wants to, he could even run away, and as long as he belongs to the Kohen, he could still eat Truma. How does that work? Well, what's the dialogue? So the dialogue is very strange. The Gemara is going to ask that in the next line. And this one, can he? Avalisha, chavula. But for a woman, the Chum said, but the Chumim said, but for her, it's certainly a disadvantage. She can't pass them in a truma. You're not going to feed him now if she's divorced. So my kamalei, my kamahadalu. What did Rav Meir tell the rabbis? Again, Rav Meir says that you can retract even in the case of an Eved because it's a disadvantage for him to be free. The Chum said no, it's an advantage, and they say you can't retract in the case of an Eved. But what was this dialogue? What did they tell him? What did he answer them? And what did he answer them? This is what he told them. You answered me right on mazonos, meaning that he has to feed him. That's true. What are you going to? This is what he told them. You've given me an answer on mazonos, meaning that as long as he's married, it's a chavan shel kadav. You told me right that it's not an advantage for him to be a slave. Why? Because the master doesn't have to give him food anyway. The master could say, okay, the first 2 hours of the day work for yourself, and the other 8 hours of the day, the other day, the work day is 10 hours, work for me. So he's not really getting an advantage by working. He's not getting food. He's not gaining anything. Okay, you've answered me on the mazonos, right? The Chum said it's an advantage for him to be there, right? Because it's an advantage for him to be free. Why? Because he could work for himself. Why isn't it an advantage for him to get food? The master doesn't have to give him food. We had a machlokas whether he has to give him food, whether we could say work for yourself and work for me, and I'm not going to feed you at all, go beg. Or he has to tell them, okay, work for the first couple hours for yourself, and the rest of the day you work for me. This way you'll have food. That's a machlokas. But either way, you could tell him, I'm not feeding you. Either go beg or work for yourself the first hour. That's your food. I'm not feeding you. So what's the advantage for the Eved to be an Eved? He's not getting any food. That's what the Chum told him. There's no advantage for the food. The master doesn't have to give him food. So Meir answered, that's the first thing. She gave me an answer right. It's not an advantage for him to be a slave in order to get mazonos because the master doesn't have to give him food. What about the truma? As long as he's the Eved of a Kohen, he gets truma. If he's not the Eved of a Kohen, he doesn't get truma. So it's a disadvantage for him to be free because he won't be able to truma anymore. Maybe you'll tell me, why is that an advantage? You say it's an advantage for him to get truma. If he wants to, the master can throw him a get shichur, and disqualify him from eating truma, right? Maybe that's going to be it. In other words, what? Because he's going to get to truma anyway. He's not going to get truma. The master could throw him a get, and he won't get truma anymore. So shavak lei ba'arik ba'azil la'alma. He says, if he suspects that the Eved will, this is what he answered. When they answered, if he wants to, he can run away. So right? What happened? He doesn't have to feed him. He says, yeah, but if the Eved's smart, what he could do is this. He can run away. That's what he answered. Let's say the Eved runs away, right? He's still the Eved of a Kohen. So he can eat truma. He can go to some place where there are Kohanim there and get truma. So he has an advantage there. In other words, Rav Meir is trying to prove that it's an advantage for the Eved to remain in the possession of the Kohen because he can eat truma even if he's not there, right? Maybe you'll say, if he wants to, it's not an advantage. I could just throw him a get anyway. He'll run away. Allow me, he could run away. That's what he meant by he said the Eved can run away. The one where Eved Kohen Shabarach Eishes Kohen Shamarda Al Bala Balochem B'Truma. They can eat truma anyway. Now he won't be able to if he gets his freedom. Again, Rav Meir is arguing that it's an advantage for him to stay. We agree that it's an advantage for a woman to be married, right? Because she's going to get supported. But our argument is about the slave. The Chacham say it's a disadvantage, and Rav Meir says, I say it's an advantage. You say there's no advantage for the food because he doesn't give him food anyway. Yeah, but this way he gets truma wherever he is. You'll tell me he can get rid of him at any time and not get the truma. Not just that, I'm saying if he wants to, he could run away. He can run away from his master. He still belongs to the master, and he'll be able to eat truma wherever he is. So that's an advantage. Ma'ilu Eved Kohen Shabarach. Veishis Kohen Shamar Al Bala. That's what the argument was. And this guy, once he gets his divorce, if the shliach is masakat for him, he can't eat truma. Shaper kamalu. So the it's a good answer that Rav said. Amarava Hainu de Gmarli Mastis, and that's what they answer in the Mishnah, Meshu Kinyano. Those last words in the Mishnah were difficult to understand. Oh, when they said, yeah, but he's ruining his wife. In other words, just like for the wife, it's a disadvantage to be divorced because she can't eat truma. The same thing, the Eved will not also be able to truma. So what does that mean? Because he's his acquisition. The boy Shakalar Brazuzim Yisrael Apostle. Very simple. Even if the Eved ran away, what's he saying? The Eved, it's an advantage for him to stay because he can eat truma. And if he suspects that the Kohen wants to dismiss him, free him, he can run away. And if he's not able to give him a get. I can't give him a get shechur. He'll be able to still eat truma. So it's an advantage for him to stay in the ownership of the Kohen. The answer is the Kohen doesn't have to give him a get. The Kohen can sell him to Yisrael. As soon as he sells him to Yisrael, he can't eat truma anymore. That's the answer. What does that mean? He belongs to him. The boy Shakalar Bezuzim Yisrael Pasale. He didn't see these words in the Mishnah. When the Mishnah says Meshu Kinyan, we didn't know what it means. Now we understand what it means. He says, no, that's only because since he owns him, he can easily get rid of him by selling him. He doesn't have to give him a get. Wherever he is, he belongs to Yisrael now. So that's a good. That was the retort of the Chachamim, that there's no advantage for the Eved remaining in the possession of the Kohen. Why? Number one, he doesn't have to feed him. What's an advantage? That he can eat truma wherever he is. The Kohen can sell him to somebody else, so it's not an advantage for him. It's not an advantage he can't do. And therefore, Chum say it's no advantage for him to remain in the possession of the Kohen. Rav Meir, so according to Rav Meir, it says that's fine. Tenach Eved Kohen. We understand, we agree that there's no advantage for the food because he could say, work for yourself. I'm not going to feed you either work the first 2 hours, or he could tell him, work for me and go beg. However you hold, like Rav Yochanan. But what about if he's not a Kohen at all, or a mayor, Tenach Eved Kohen? So an Eved Kohen, you could say he had an advantage. He could eat truma wherever he is until he gets sold. Eved Yisrael might come. What about an Eved Yisrael? What happens if there's no truma involved? What's the advantage of an Eved Yisrael? Food the master doesn't have to give him. So why is there an advantage for an Eved Yisrael to be free? Eved Yisrael ma'ikal lemeim. What's the advantage for him to stay Eved? What's the advantage for him to stay as an Eved? Right? The Chum say it's not an advantage for him, right? Because he'd rather be free. He doesn't get food and he doesn't have to get truma either. The guy could sell him. Because now he can no longer sleep with the Shifra Kananis. Right? Now, like he cannot, as long as he's an Eved Kanan, he can sleep with the Shifra Kananis. Once he's freed and he's a full Jew, he can't sleep with the Shifra Kananis anymore. Unless he becomes an Eved, right? That's Adarabba, Harehu Matir Baschom. Just the opposite. Now he can marry a regular Jewess. What's the problem, man? He says, Avda Befker Nechle. He'd rather have Hefker. He'd rather be promiscuous. Zilale, she's cheap in his eyes. Zolei Lebeina, Nizalzabal. He can do whatever he wants with her. Shchichale, she's always available. Pritzale, she'll be promiscuous with him. It's the Hagesim of a princess. So he'd rather an Eved Kanani is used to sleeping around with the different Shifra Kananis over there. He'd rather have that. So that's the advantage. According to, we don't see that in the words of the Mishnah or anywhere in the Gemara until now, that's what Meir says why it's an advantage for him to stay as an Eved, and therefore the master who sent a get can retract as long as the Eved Kanani hasn't received it yet, just like he can retract on the get of his wife. If he sent the get for his wife and retracted, everybody agrees that's a disadvantage for her to be divorced, and therefore Kolzman that she didn't receive it yet, he can retract. All right, tomorrow we'll start from the mission.
Question?
Yeah.
What is the advantage? I mean, like a goof up question. What's the advantage of truma for the Eved?
Because it's probably cheaper. It means if he gets it on his own, because it's
just some.
He just gives him more food
for him to have
truma. Two things. Number one, number one, because it means there's more supply available to him. In other words, whatever truma is there, it's an advantage for him. And also, there's not such a big demand for the truma, so it's cheaper on the market. So therefore, if he's an Eved, if he can buy food for cheaper, that's an advantage, like for a Kohen. Shavua Tov. Imagine having that discussion with an Eved.
To be guilty truma, then you'd be a bigger deal.
No, it's cheaper. It's probably, it's cheaper. It's cheaper. You're right. There are some disadvantages. You have to eat at the Tara, etc. It's not simple. Yeah.
It makes no sense.
Very strange.
Right. Can you imagine that conversation?
Huh?
I think you're saying like, I'd like you to work all day today, and you have no access to any food, and I'm not going to feed you. Surely you jest, master.
Can you imagine?